Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Holistic Health Radio. I'm your host, Sarah Liz King. I'm an exercise physiologist and health coach, empowering you to find your healthy balance with food, fitness, and your body. On today's podcast, I am joined by the very wonderful Holly, and she is going to be speaking with us about her real recovery story. So, a big warm welcome to the show, Holly. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. Very excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
So excited to chat with you in a different way, obviously, because we know each other so intimately. And our delightful podcast listeners are going to get to hear more about you and your story in a little bit. But all of the listeners of the show know that we like starting these episodes with a few fun get to know you questions. And yours is no different. So, first questions first is what is your coffee order?
So I am new to the coffee game, and it has been a game changer. I have eased myself in. I'm still at the mocha stage or an iced vanilla latte. So anything sweet is kind of the way that I go.
If you don't get coffee, are you a tea drinker?
I'm a tea drinker and I love a Diet Coke, as a little
Yes.
afternoon pick me up.
Yes, don't we all? I feel like that is like, I don't normally crave anything, but like in summer on a really hot day, I'm like,
Yes.
Diet Coke, Coke Zero, it's just the way to go.
So crispy and delicious.
Have you seen those? I'm not sure if they come up on your social media, but like the videos for like the crisp Diet Cokes. And I was like,
Yeah.
what a crispy Coke is. And I was like, that's
Yeah,
a new one, but also can relate.
absolutely.
What are you grateful for today?
Today I'm grateful for the sunshine after a beautiful long weekend and just sitting in the sun. And also living by the beach and being near water, I find is just the most grounding thing. Um, and I think just having an incredibly supportive, group of friends and family around me at the moment, particularly, yeah, coming off the back of Easter.
Yeah. And it was, if we're both living in Sydney, it was quite a spectacular long weekend weather-wise. So I'm equally on the same page as you. So grateful that we're just having such a lovely, no longer summer, but going into autumn, warm, wonderful autumn.
Exactly.
What is the best gift that you've ever given someone or received yourself?
That is a great question. And I would have to say, for Christmas, my boyfriend bought me a kombucha starter kit. So, with all the things you need to kind of make your own kombucha. And I am obsessed. It's my new hobby. I make a new brew, every week or every fortnight. And I just love testing out new flavors and, yeah, making them fizzy, keeping them flat. Yeah, it's a bit of fun.
Well, this leads very nicely into our next question because we know there's going to be one thing that we find in your fridge now, which is kombucha. But what are some of the other things we can always find in your fridge?
It really is two things that are always there on top of the kombucha. Yogurt, always. I'm a yogurt girly at meals, at snacks. I absolutely love it. And also, I'm really on a Coles chocolate kind of trend at the moment. It's so
Ooh,
so cheap, cheaper than Cadbury, and I think it's honestly better than any chocolate that I've ever had before.
you've
Have
heard
you
it
had it?
here first. No, now I'm going to have to
Oh,
go and try it.
it's so good, so creamy. Yeah, it's so good.
Which flavors do you recommend?
Just the OG milk
Yep,
chockey. And
yep.
the dark chocolate is good too. But yeah, the milk is the way to go.
All right, I'm going to have to go buy some now. I'm doing my shopping day tomorrow, so I'll put it on the list.
Yeah, let me know what you think.
I will. And last but not least, what are your daily non-negotiables that make you feel your absolute best?
I always like to start the day off with making the bed. I cannot go to work or do anything until that bed is made. And also making sure that I read, even if it's one page, maybe it's 20, maybe it's 30, some sort of book. I like to sit down and read, whether it's on the ferry on the way to work or just right before bed.
Yeah.
So those are kind of my two at the moment that I have to do.
Now we're only in the start of 2024. Have you had any books that you've read and loved so far this year?
I am actually on book number 16 so far, so
Wow, well
I'm
done.
flying
Flying
through
through.
them. But I actually haven't read any that have been outstanding. One that has been good is Green Dot, which was going around over summer, and that was a good little summer fun romance novel.
Yeah, well, we'll keep us updated with the book reviews. Now we're going to talk a little bit about you and your story as it comes to recovery specifically. But before we dive into that, can you tell us a little bit about who you are as a human being, as a person on this big, wonderful planet that we live on, and
Mhm.
also what you're currently doing in this wonderful life?
Yeah, of course. So I am 25, soon to be 26 in May. I'm a Gemini for anyone who cares about star signs. I'm an introverted extrovert. I love being around people and being quite social, but I also really need alone time to kind of recharge and feel my best. I work in HR at a law firm, which I love. I've been doing that for 2.5 years. I completed my undergraduate degree in sports science and then decided that wasn't the path that I kind of wanted to go down. Transitioned into HR by doing my master's degree. And yeah, have been in that ever since. And I absolutely love it. And as I mentioned before, I live on the northern beaches in Manly. So just moved back home to save some money. And I just feel so fortunate to be by the water because I think it is my favorite place to be. It brings me back down to earth and it just brightens up my day. So whether it's just a walk by the water or going for a swim, that is something that I really love, and is definitely a core part of who I am.
It's definitely that little reset, that little grounding moment. I know it's how
Hmm.
I start my day. I need to see the water, I need to see the ocean.
Yeah.
That little morning routine or evening routine just absolutely makes my day. Now, in terms of your story, I'm so excited to be able to share this with everyone, but I always like starting out by kind of painting a picture of what life was like before your eating disorder. Can you tell us a little bit about what your life was like growing up?
Hmm. Yeah, so I lived a very privileged upbringing, which I'm very grateful to my parents for providing me with. I lived in a very stable, loving home with a mum, a dad, a younger sister. I had a very solid relationship with food growing up. It was a real source of pleasure for me, and anyone who kind of knew me at school knew that if they couldn't find me, I'd probably be at the canteen buying a bagel or a lolly bag or a chocolate chip cookie. I didn't think twice about what I kind of put in my mouth. I had a very stable relationship with exercise. I loved moving my body. I played a lot of tennis and a lot of soccer and other kind of team sports. And there was never really anything in my childhood when I look back that was kind of out of the ordinary. I mean, of course, I kind of grew up in that generation where you go to the doctors and the magazines in front of you are plastered with, pictures of people of women's bodies and demonizing them and the next fad diet, but that never had any kind of impact on me as a child. I had a very happy and stable and wonderful, yeah, upbringing.
And I think that's often the case for people. And I think specifically when I work with, people that are younger and families, they often get into this habit of going like, oh, I must have done something wrong in that person's upbringing. And sometimes it's just the perfect storm of different factors that leads a person to developing an eating disorder or disordered eating, even if they do have a very stable, loving, privileged home and
Yeah.
upbringing. When were you kind of first aware of some of the signs that you were struggling with your relationship with food, exercise, or your body? Like, which particular element did you actually notice first?
Yeah, so for me, it was really the food. I mean, I might go back and just add a bit of context and color to the story. So I took a gap year straight after school, and I was very young. I was only 17 at the time and moved over to London, and I'd never been away from family before. And I think that kind of was brand new for me. And yeah, I was just so young, and I didn't know how to cope with the anxiety that I was feeling and the difficult emotions that were coming up. So I really turned to food as a coping mechanism at that time because I didn't know what else to do. I stopped moving my body, and food was kind of this main focus. I then, after 12 months, returned back to Australia, and I knew, I started seeing a psychologist. I knew I needed to go back to moving my body a little bit more and returning to, I guess, the relationship with food that I had prior to my gap year. And with that, obviously, came, unintentional weight loss. And then with that came the compliments from people around me, of course, all well intended, saying that I looked so much better and I was brighter and how good I looked. And I think I really latched onto that kind of validation and attention as such. Um, and then it was kind of from there, I had 2 major wrist surgeries and quite a traumatic dog bite injury that occurred. And then I think that was when a switch in my brain kind of just flipped, and I went straight downhill. I, kind of fell into that calorie counting, over exercising, really focused on my body. I think as a means to kind of control things that I couldn't kind of keep a hand on outside of, food. And that was kind of where it all went downhill.
Yeah. You spoke about this kind of like flip of a switch moment, and
Mm.
I can actually recall in my brain when that happened for me. It gets seared in there.
Mm.
Do you remember a specific like day or moment where you were just like, this is what I'm setting my mind to, even if you thought it might have been from like a healthy place?
Mm. Yeah, I think one particular moment that stands out was my mum had kind of said to me that she was quite concerned about what was going on. And I said, no, no, there's nothing. And I remember that morning she said, okay, we'll make sure that you prepare yourself a nourishing lunch whilst I'm gone. And I prepared a sandwich and took a photo and sent it to her, and then threw that sandwich in the bin. And that's when I knew, Holly, like, there is something greater going on here that you really need to get a handle on, or you're going to go, to a dark, dark place.
Yeah. And as most stories go, I think a lot of times when you notice things are not going in a direction that you see as a positive one, often that's not the direct moment where things typically stop.
Mm.
Sometimes there is, once this flip of a switch happens, a deterioration of events that can be stopped at, quite a soon moment. And sometimes they can progress until what you hit is what you would define as your own quote unquote
Mm.
rock bottom. From that moment that you kind of was like, oh, things aren't so grand, to when you actually started seeking help, what was life like for you?
It was very lonely. I remember feeling very trapped in my own head with all of these thoughts that I didn't know what to make of them. I also, I floated the idea that maybe there was an eating disorder going on, but I also felt, the feeling that a lot of people have, which was that I wasn't small enough to have an eating disorder. And so how could that be true? And it must be something else. But I just remember feeling so alone. And I felt like, because I wasn't, in the media's eyes, in this tiny little body, how could I be sick enough? And therefore, how could I ever vocalize to anyone the way that I was feeling without them kind of ridiculing me and saying that I was over exaggerating or just attention seeking? So it was a very lonely and awful place to be in, where I felt like I had no control over what was kind of going on in my brain.
It's so interesting how it's such a common occurrence for people to invalidate their own experience
Mm.
in the process of potentially maybe seeking help or not seeking help, because of these beliefs that we have built up around what an eating disorder looks like. And I think there's been so much work done to obviously dismantle that belief system and to say to the world, you can't actually tell whether or not someone is struggling with their relationship with food or exercise or their body simply by looking at them. But we still have such a long way to go in that
Mm-hmm.
respect. And, that voice in your head and in many people's head thrives in that secrecy, in that invalidation. And that's
Mm.
what can keep things going on for much, much longer than they need to go on
Mm-hmm.
for. How did you end up getting to a place where you could actually ask for help? Because that's such a big step.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what came over me, but I went for a walk with mum one day, and I think the thoughts had just been very loud and overpowering, and I needed to speak up because I think at that point I had kind of accepted that it potentially was an eating disorder. And I said to mum, I think there is something greater going on here. From there, I was very fortunate that it was a very easy kind of road to getting help. I was very privileged in the way that I called up an eating disorder clinic and got in with a psychologist and a dietitian almost immediately. So I know that's not everyone else's experience, but I was very lucky in that way. But even, I started seeing a psychologist and dietitian kind of weekly, but it really took a good 9 or 10 months of going downhill, even while seeing both of those people before I kind of started on the real kind of recovery track, as I would call it.
Yeah. And a lot of times people need to hear, and I know this was the case for me. I went through lots of different seasons of like treatment and seasons
Mm,
of help where, yeah, I would say I was quote unquote in recovery, but I wasn't doing recovery. I
yeah.
was simply coasting through,
Hmm.
doing what I would say is the bare minimum or sometimes less
Hmm.
because my I was trapped in my brain and I didn't know how to get out. And part of me, there was a moment where like in some seasons of that I didn't want to because I couldn't see what life would have been like on the other side,
Hmm.
which is a scary place to be, but staying with some form of treatment definitely helped me move through that. When you reach that like 9 or 10 month mark and you started taking more action, was there something that was really helpful for you in terms of your goals or something that you were keeping in your mind that made consistency something that felt maybe marginally easier than before?
Yeah, I think for me, I had kind of hit that rock bottom area, and I ended up going inpatient at a clinic, which was really, really helpful for me. And I think kind of that initial re-nourishing of my body and refeeding was really helpful in kind of realigning my brain with, okay, either you can opt to go backwards and live this very miserable life, or you can give recovery a go. I had a lot of kind of, I guess, goals that I was working towards, or kind of my why. A lot of them were to do with, the relationships that I had. My, yeah, my family relationship was really difficult at that point in time because I was so miserable and difficult to be around. I had lost quite a lot of my friendships in that I wasn't going out and socializing. I wasn't working at the time because I wasn't in the space to do so. And so I felt like I was falling behind. I was in my early 20s. It was the time that all of my friends were kind of, yeah, locking down jobs and coasting through uni, and that wasn't where I was kind of heading. So it was kind of looking at the bigger picture and reminding myself that either I could stay exactly where I was or I could give recovery a go.
I love that you mentioned that aspect of it. I think we often kind of glaze over this point that when you're in an eating disorder or disordered eating and it's really ruling your life, it can feel like you're at a standstill watching
Mm.
life happen around you
Mm.
and life happen to you, but you're not really directing your own life. And I think that aspect of being stuck can actually keep people
Mm.
stuck because maybe you get to a point where you're like, oh, life isn't so bad. Like this existence is a well known
Mm.
thing. So I can kind of stay here. But it's also that really stuck feeling that can prevent us from moving out and actually reaching the full recovery that we know we deserve and we actually really, really want as well. Now, for you, obviously, going in inpatient was a really helpful thing. And coming back out of that, how did you maintain your ability to kind of keep moving forward? And did you ever reach another kind of stage where you felt quite stuck again?
Yeah, I mean, I think that feeling of stuckness that you're referring to was really at the core of my 6 or 7 year journey. I mean, the way in which it manifested really depended on the season that I was in that recovery journey. So at the beginning, I'd go to my appointments and leave feeling very motivated, and within hours I'd fallen off that wagon and was telling myself that I'd get back on track, in a week's time at my next appointment. After inpatient, there was more motivation there, but I felt like I wasn't moving forward. I feel like that stuckness was always kind of there. And it wasn't until, quite a few years later, about 2.5 years later, when I met you, Sarah, that I kind of realized that that stuckness didn't have to be a forever thing, but it would just require a lot of action and a lot of doing, which I wasn't engaging in, to kind of get past that stuck feeling.
Yeah. What do you think prompted you to try recovery coaching? Because it is a little bit different from, I guess, traditionally just seeing a psychologist or just seeing a dietitian. How was that experience? Well, first of all, like, what did you know about coaching before you actually started?
So I had really no understanding of what was involved in coaching. All I knew was that my experiences with psychologists and dietitians and psychiatrists had been great, but I had kind of reaped all the benefits that I could. I had this big book of everything that I needed to do, but when it came to doing the things, there was no accountability, no pushing there. It was kind of all reliant on me to kind of navigate my way through. So I don't know how, but I stumbled across your podcast, and your Instagram page, and I really resonated with your approach to eating disorder treatment and the kind of action side of it. And I thought, okay, having, Sarah be there 24/7 as an accountability coach who I can lean on in those challenging moments, which you obviously don't get from psychologists. You get 1 hour a week. I just knew that that was something that I needed to try. I was also at my wit's end. Like, I had been struggling for a good 5 or so years, and I knew that either I could stay exactly where I was, which would have been okay, but did I really want to live an okay life? No, I knew there was so much more out there for me, which is why I kind of, yeah, went on a whim and reached out to you. And it is a decision I am so grateful for.
And I will be one to say I definitely pushed you, which I
Mhm.
know is often really tough for people if you've been in a space where you've kind of been coasting. So things have been okay, things have been all right, but you set out these goals and you really want them to happen. And in order for them to happen, you need some firm but fair kind of nudging in
Mhm.
the right direction. When we were working together, what were some of the kind of most helpful things that really moved the needle forward for you in your recovery? And what were some of the things that you were like the biggest obstacles that you kept noticing get in the way?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, if we start with the obstacles, for me, I think I thought that I would dive into coaching and it would be quite a quick fix. It absolutely wasn't. And I think that the benefits that I saw, whilst now on reflection, they are so vast and I have grown so significantly. At the time, it felt like I really wasn't moving anywhere. Again, that kind of stuck feeling. I'd have three, really solid weeks in a row, and then all of a sudden I felt like I hadn't moved anywhere or something would throw me, and I was back into this feeling of I haven't grown, I haven't changed, nothing's working. So having you there, Sarah, was really grounding, and you were very good at kind of guiding me back to, okay, well, look at how far you've come in 3 weeks, even though they were small, little incremental things, they all kind of added up. So, yeah, one of the biggest obstacles was that feeling of, am I ever going to be better? Which you and I talked about in most of our sessions. It was a thought that always came up for me. But kind of, yeah, willing myself to push through. And it really, with that, it kind of came down to, okay, well, either you can stay as you are and continue feeling stuck, or you can keep on trying at recovery. And based on stories that you've heard and experiences that people have had, I think there is light at the end of the tunnel. You just need to keep kind of digging in order to get there. In terms of, I guess, the things that were really beneficial, like I said before, the action side of things, having you there to kind of guide me and be there, if I had scheduled something that was going to be particularly challenging, being able to reach out to you before or during or after to kind of check in on how I was feeling, and for you to kind of recenter me was really helpful. And I appreciated that you always guided me towards my why. You always said, remind yourself, what is your why, and where do you want to be, and what is the life that you want to ultimately kind of live. So that kind of push. And yeah, I just think the practical guidance that you gave me was something that I don't think that you can necessarily get from your standard, psychologist, dietitian, psychiatrist. They of course play a role, but coaching is on another level.
The thing I think that really helped me in my own recovery was recognizing that nobody could do it for me.
Mm.
I so wanted to go and see a therapist or see a dietitian and for them to give me the perfect plan and for it to just magically happen. And for me to seamlessly reach this place from A to B without having to put in any effort. And what I recognized and realized was nobody was going to come and save me.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
The only way out of this was through doing all of these things that I knew would actually help me get from A to B. It wasn't about the
Mm-hmm.
perfect plan. It was about trying, pushing myself outside of my comfort zone, noticing when it didn't go to plan, picking myself back up,
Mm.
definitely having support to help me through that and continually moving forward. And I think what goes alongside of that is having to build up a lot of mental resilience and a lot of um, different tools that you can use to go alongside all of the actions to make sure that you don't essentially burn yourself
Mm.
out or give up. You spoke a lot about your why being a really important component for you in that toolbox. Were there any other mindset tools that you felt were really, really helpful for you in consistently applying yourself in recovery?
Yeah, I think it came down to, I think it's individualized as well. I think different approaches work differently for different people. For me, we tried the initial, challenge something once a week and then challenge it again the following week. But I think the issue for me, and I think a lot of people will relate, is you do that challenge and then you immediately kind of revert back to safety afterwards. Even if it's still, not necessarily compensation, it's kind of reverting to what your eating disorder knows and is comfortable with. The thing that really propelled me, I think, in those last kind of couple of months was that it just honestly had to feel like challenge after challenge after challenge. So it was pushing myself with opposite actions. That was the biggest kind of thing for me. So when a thought came up in my head to not have XYZ or to do XYZ, it was an automatic, okay, well, we reject that idea and we will engage with the complete opposite. And I think that was what really got me to the end stage of recovery. Just pushing myself. And of course it was so challenging, at times I would message you and I would say, it's felt like this for 2 weeks. Like, I just feel like I'm a hamster on a wheel. I'm going to fall off at any point. And the truth is, I didn't. And I wish I had known that sooner. I wish I knew that I was so capable and I was so able to keep on challenging and that it would get easier. And it did. But it took me consistently challenging, meal after snack after meal after snack until it no longer felt scary. So just that kind of resilience and reminding myself, you have to go through these hard things. You can't go around them. You can't go under them. You have to go straight through them.
And I think that is the only way that you build up those elements that you just spoke of, which is how capable and strong you actually are.
Mm.
You only prove that to yourself when you have to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I know one of the things that often comes up for a lot of individuals is in the build up to pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone. And I know we definitely spoke about this, was this element of anticipatory anxiety.
Mm.
So, oh my goodness, this is going to feel exponentially so hard. And oftentimes, what ends up happening is that is far worse than the actual challenge or situation itself. But how did you deal in those moments of real discomfort, either before a situation or afterwards?
Yeah, great question. And that anticipatory anxiety was the worst kind of part of challenging things for me. I really struggled with the approach to things, but the doing it was actually okay. I think the thing I really had to rely on was accountability from whether it was a friend, a family member, or my boyfriend, letting them know that, I was planning on doing this and it was probably going to be difficult, but I needed them to kind of keep me accountable. And whether that was, coming and picking up the item with me or sitting on the couch with me or doing whatever I needed to do, I really lent on my social circle and relationships to kind of get me through that anxiety. I also, would sometimes do a bit of journaling, pros and cons of engaging in particular behaviors. And that was really helpful to kind of write it out, have it in front of me, and realize that, only good would come of challenging whatever thought was kind of going on or challenging a particular food. So those were kind of the two main ones for me. And again, consistently reminding myself of the why. And I remember at the beginning, Sarah, we talked about it a lot, the reminding yourself of why are you working towards recovery. And I remember thinking, this is so redundant and repetitive, and it's really not going to help me. But that was so helpful. And leaning on, what does your future look like? What do you want it to look like? What will it look like if you stay where you are? Was a game changer for me.
Yeah. And I think the one that can be an extra layer for anyone listening is your why is so important, but also
Mm.
thinking about, well, what will that feel like
Mm.
to live that kind of life? Because we are so much driven, we are so driven by our emotions. But I feel like eating disorders and disordered eating often numb us out from a lot of feelings. We
Mm.
get not very good at naming what they are. We don't care about whether or not they're there, but actually really honing in on, this is so important to me, this is what I want, and how good will this feel for
Mm.
me, is just that extra little layer which can help anyone who might be listening to this episode really hone in on that factor. Because I think you are so right, is your guiding light that keeps driving you forward in this entire process. um, Also, you did mention that things like how capable you are and how strong you are were things that you definitely learned about yourself through the process of recovery. What else would you say that you have learned about yourself through the process of recovery?
Um, I mean, I think I've learnt a lot about the person that I am. I think for, 6 or 7 years, my personality was quite masked by my eating disorder. So even just seeing little parts of my, who I was as a child and in high school kind of coming back to the surface. So that was one big thing. I'd forgotten quite a lot of who I was. So that was really, really wonderful. I think again that I am resilient. One of the biggest things I learned, I think I've always kind of thought that the thoughts that are going on in my head are things that have to be acted on, and they are who I am, and they are a big kind of part of me. But it was a big realization to come to that thoughts are just thoughts. You don't have to act on them. They don't necessarily mean anything. So that was a really, really big one for me. But yeah, I think the personality kind of coming back, and I grew as a person. I came into more color, and was able to kind of focus on more important aspects of my life rather than my body and food and movement.
Yeah, I think getting the spark back or the sparkle
Mm.
back in your life is one of the most beautiful things to notice. And sometimes you need someone there in your care team and your support team who reminds you of the fact that that sparkle coming back, or holding that for you, or
Mm.
even giving some of theirs to you in moments where you don't have as much, can help you move through those difficult moments, because life does get so much bigger and brighter on the
Yeah.
other side. But it's a tough road that you have to go through to get there. And one of the things I think can actually be quite difficult in the first stages of recovery, or even like when you're stuck in that stage of quasi recovery, is grasping this concept of full recovery. It
Mm.
can feel like a really foreign concept when you're really in the midst of disordered eating or an eating disorder. For you, how does being in a good place with your relationship with food and exercise in your body actually feel? Like, what does life look like now compared to when you were in that stage of quasi recovery?
I cannot explain how much more wonderful my life is. Like, I cannot sing higher about it. I think my life, at the beginning of my eating disorder, then the middle of it when things were okay, but not amazing, versus now, they are not even comparable. I no longer, food, exercise, my body are no longer the center part of my day, which they were for so long. It was all I thought about. I now no longer really ever think about it apart from the perspective of I'm really looking forward to getting, coffee and a pastry with my boyfriend on a Saturday morning. Or when a friend messages me and says, do you want to go for a midweek dinner after work? And I can just say yes like that. And rather than fearing the food or trying to factor it into my day, I'm able to just kind of say yes and look forward to the social aspect of it. And don't get me wrong, I love a good feed as well. So I look forward to the food rather than kind of fearing it. Um, I think even coming off the back of Easter, a 4-day long weekend, for years, those were the weekends that I absolutely dreaded because they are about, celebrating with friends and family, and there's a lot of food and drinking and there's not a lot of movement involved, and I used to absolutely dread them. I can now say that, for this Easter long weekend, I've really looked forward to it. I've looked forward to resting my body and not necessarily exercising in, a prescribed way, maybe a gentle walk with my parents, going for a swim in the ocean, making sure that I had plenty of Easter eggs and not feeling guilty or shameful for that. I think those have kind of been the main things. I think also I never, I could not understand in the throes of my eating disorder how people could ever identify between their hunger and their fullness. I thought that people just always had to think about food 24/7, and anyone who said they didn't was probably lying. That's not true. I feel very in tune with my body. I feel, comfortable canceling out of a Pilates class because I've had a meeting put in my diary at work. I also think, you know, no longer relying on restriction as a means to kind of cope with difficult emotions. I can talk to a friend or my boyfriend, or I can go for a walk, or I can meditate, or maybe I'll do some coloring in. There's just so much more when it comes to addressing difficult emotions other than restriction or over exercising. And I think, of course, that's not to say that I love my body all of the time. And of course, there are thoughts that do kind of crop up. But again, it's reminding myself, well, those thoughts are just thoughts and I don't have to act on them. I can just do the complete opposite of what they've said. And it's just a very different, wonderful, beautiful, bright, incredible world. And I'm so grateful to have kind of come out the last 7 years, because I truly did not think that full recovery was an option at all. I thought everyone was lying to me, but they weren't.
You and I, we don't lie. Full recovery is possible, and it's good to have hope and stories where people show and speak about coming out of the other side. And I think one of the things that was so beautiful that you mentioned was it is greater than you had ever imagined. I
Mm.
often describe it as living life in true color versus on a gray scale of black and white. And it does feel like that. You open your eyes and everything feels like fresh and new and
Hmm.
exciting. And even though things have been hard and it may be months or years of your life that have felt like they've almost been taken away from you, what you get back is a
Mm.
hundred times better. So thank you so much for sharing that with everyone. And thank you for trusting me with part of your recovery journey. It's been an absolute pleasure and an honor to guide you through that. What I would love to know as we kind of wrap up this conversation is two things. The first is, what's something that you wish you knew before starting recovery? And then the second is, what's a piece of advice that you would give someone currently going through recovery?
Something I wish I knew before starting recovery, I think for one, it's talked about a lot now, which is great, but you do not have to get to your sickest or what you think is sick enough to get help. You are worthy of help as soon as those thoughts start cropping up. It doesn't have to develop into a full-blown eating disorder. You don't have to be at a certain weight. I think you are valid and you deserve to get help from the get-go. As soon as you start kind of doubting what's going on in your brain, I think you go and get that help. You don't wait. I think that is something that I really wish I knew at the beginning, and wish I had kind of thrown myself into recovery, from that kind of aspect. I also think, and I say this because it was something that was such a core part of my last 6 or 7 years. I just wish I believed that full recovery was possible. I spent so many hours Googling, is full recovery possible? Like, does it even exist? I want you to know that it does. I thought it didn't. I really truly did not think I would ever get past a place of being like, oh, okay, life is fine. Life is incredible. You can get past that kind of place where food and exercise and your body are not the center part of your day, let alone a small snippet of it. It's so tiny for me. So those are kind of the two things that I wish I'd known going into recovery and had kind of trusted myself on. I think in terms of the advice that I would give to people going through recovery, one, you are so capable of making your way through the journey. I think the fact that, if you are in recovery, that just goes to show that there is some small part of you that wants this and believes that you can get there. So you have to really trust that you can. It feels impossible at times, but it's not. I think, as I mentioned before, you have to go through hard things to grow. You can't go around them, you can't go under them. You have to go through them, and you have to accept that it's going to feel hard and it's going to be difficult, but the greater good is so worth it. And I think, yeah, your thoughts are just thoughts. You don't have to act on them. Use, the people around you, rely on them. I think with having a coach, if you can get one, it was an incredible game changer for me. And I think for me, I'm such a people pleaser. I remember at the beginning, I was worried about bothering Sarah on the weekends or, at night or, twice in one day. But having someone who was there and who validated me and who made me feel seen and supported is, yeah, something I would highly recommend. If you can, yeah, if that's an option to you, go and get a coach, get Sarah, get on her wait list. But yeah, those would kind of be my main things. But recovery is 100% possible because I did it. Yeah.
You did it. You're living proof.
Mm.
And I just want to say thank you so much for sharing so openly and honestly with everyone on today's podcast. It has been so lovely rehearing your story and just seeing how big and beautiful your life is now, and also sharing your knowledge with everyone who I'm sure will gain so much insight from this episode. So, as we wrap up, again, thank you everyone for listening. If you really enjoyed this episode, you can feel free to take a screenshot of wherever you're listening. You can tag me at Sarah Liz King, and I'll be sure to reshare those on my stories. Also, a big help for the podcast is if you are listening on Apple Podcasts, feel free to leave a 5-star rating and review. You can also review on Spotify if that's where you're listening. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, hit subscribe, give us a thumbs up. It really helps to support the channel. Until next time, keep looking after yourselves, and I will be back next week with a fresh new episode that you can wrap your ears around.